We're here today to talk about the standard hookup for an ARS 4 compressor and Cryostat. Just to show you a little some things on the front panel. In here is your water lines in and out. This is your power cord. Normally in the US we supply the cord and the connector. If it's used abroad, we usually normally would just supply this without the connector, have the wires coated so you could actually install the connector for overseas. The next thing here is your gas fill and vent. This is used as if you have low pressure in the compressor and have to add pressure. I would recommend that you have to use something with the regulator from a high pressure cylinder to actually add pressure. This is a 1/4 inch compression fitting. Normally what you could use is stainless steel tubing, copper tubing, or you could use braided stainless steel tubing, and that's compatible for high pressure. The next is you have these here have dust caps on it, and this is for your flex lines going from the compressor to the cryostat. So this would be your return, and this is your supply. The next thing up here is your front panel. This is your on-off switch, which is also a circuit breaker. So one, you have to be careful rocking this back and forth multiple times, because what will happen, you get a high carbon buildup on the connector and it will cause the switch to fail. Here's your hour meter for how many hours the compressor is running. These are your indicating for over temperature, and this is for the power cord is not running correctly. And here are your 2 fuses. This is also your run cord receptacle for the compressor to the cryostat. And here is your gas supply pressure at static pressure. So when you get it, that's one of the things you need to look at, that you have the right pressure for the right size compressor. Now this is an ARS 4 compressor, so the static pressure is 200 psi. It could be 200 to 205. If you're 195, 190, 180, then you need to call ARS, read the manual. It'll explain to you how to add pressure to the manual, normally through this vent valve. If the pressure is only 20 psi less, I would fill it up to 200, maybe make a mark with a piece of tape, and just let it sit overnight just to make sure you don't have a leak. If it's still good by morning, you should be good. If not, just call ARS service, and if you have a mass spectrometer, we'll show you how to use it and to indicate if there's a leak on the compressor itself. Right now we're at the rear of the compressor. I just want to point out a few things. One is your tip and tail, to make sure that the blue is below your triangle. If for some reason it is above this triangle, that means that it was flipped over during shipment. You need to call ARS service, which is located at the bottom of the compressor, with the information and phone number to make a contact. So that's the first thing I would do in order to make sure that the compressor is still functioning correctly. The other thing is, this is all the identification for the compressor. It gives you the serial number of the compressor, and it also will identify the work order number for your particular system. So it's important information to write down in case you have any trouble and you're talking to the ARS service tech. This way he could easily look it up and see what is going on during manufacturing. Okay, next step, we're going to be installing the water lines, which will be coming from your laboratory to the compressor. In some instances, I know most labs might be hooked up to a chiller, so you have to look at the temperature and the flow on our spec sheet in the manual in order to make sure you have the correct water. The other thing is, if it's too cold, I recommend before you turn the water on, turn the compressor on, and then let it run for about 10-20 seconds, and then turn the water flow on after that. A lot of times what happens if in cold weather, or if your water is too cold, it'll make the oil thicker, more viscous, and will cause a high amp, high current startup, which will actually trip the circuit breaker. So in doing the water lines, what I like to show is I would first take the nut off to inspect that the furrows are put on correctly. So with your water line, I would put your nut on first. The way this looks here is how you put it on correctly. Slide that over, and then this furrow over that, to make sure you have the furrows in the correct position. After that, I would push the tube in, slide your nut in place with the furrows, hand tighten so you have it snug, and then finish it off with an 11/16 open end wrench. You can also use an adjustable wrench if you only have metric available. So what you want to do is snug it down, not tighten it too tight, but just get it that you have a nice snug fit. And then make sure you could just tug on it a little bit to make sure it doesn't move. And as far as the insulation goes, you should be good. Now we're looking at the hoses. They come like, you're going to actually receive them like this with the rest of the equipment, and they usually have wire ties on them. So what you need to do is you could use scissors or a box knife. I'd recommend using a wire cutter. These are just nylon straps, which you could easily just cut the straps all the way around to lengthen your hose. The other thing is they're actually marked with tape, okay, for the supply and the return, which is identified on the compressor. The other thing, they are charged, pre-charged with helium gas, the same as the compressor. So we charge them to 250 psi. So when you hook them up to the cryostat and to the compressor, you may get a slight increase in pressure from 200 to 205, which is fine. You do not have to relieve the pressure. If it goes up to 210 or 215, I would just use the charge vent valve, adjust your pressure back down to 200, and you should be good. We also send it with dust caps, so you don't get anything inside the air quip. So they all come with it. So you will remove these, inspect the internals to make sure there's no dirt or anything inside. And then after that, we could actually put it onto the compressor and the cryostat. All right, now we're going to talk about installing the hoses to the compressor. You have another dust cap here, so you need to remove that. And you can see that you have a poppet, and you also have a gasket, which is a flat seal. When you look at this, you got to make sure that that is in there. If it's not there, you will put your air quip on, and you're going to slowly create a leak. So when you're inspecting this, before you put your air quip on, always make sure that this seal is in place, or you're going to have a potential leak and you won't even know it, because it won't be a very loud leak. It'll just leak slowly in time. So normally what we do is we supply spanner wrenches. You're going to need for this is 1 3/16, and then you're also going to need a 1-inch spanner wrench to install the air quips. This is a number 8 air quip. So what you want to do is get it set, slowly engage the threads, get a couple turns on it by hand till you get like that. Then next, what you want to do is you want to actually locate the one spanner wrench so you don't end up screwing it off of the flex line. And then you want to use this spanner wrench to tighten it. So what you want to do is you want to continue tighten this until it fully engages. You know, once you're all the way in, if you don't turn the air clip all the way in, right now it's tight, so you just want to give it a little extra on the nut and you're done. If you don't take it all the way to the front, it's going to leak on you in time, so slowly it'll leak gas out of here if it's not fully engaged. Next, we're going to actually install the run cord, which is on this 26 pin connector. If you notice, we really only use 4 pins to run the cryostat. So if you look at the schematic in the manual, we'll identify where they are placed in the run cord. So what we'll do is we'll install the run cord. You just turn it until it fits in. You adjust this till it locks. And that's all you have to do for that. Alright, here we are now. We're going to hook up the cryostat. What'll happen is the cryostat will be in a separate box, and your rad shield and your shroud will also be in another box, normally like the installation items. Just look at your packing list when you get the system. First, to install the rad shield. You see it has a threaded mount here. Slowly put that on. Screw it in until it bottoms out. Now what you want to do is, if there's a problem when it's running, and it might actually rotate some, you may be able to put some Appease-On N, which is for cryogenics and for thermal conductivity. That'll help lock this in place so it doesn't move when the piston is reciprocating up and down. Once you get your position set, then just double check that you have a smooth surface for the O-rings. I would recommend use a little bit of Dow Corning vacuum grease, or you could use Appease-On N, which is cryogenic grease also. Then slowly put your shroud over there. Now when you press it on the O-rings, you have to wiggle it a little bit until it goes on, and then you're engaged. And then you can actually rotate it in relationship to the rad shield for optical access. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to hook up the run cord coming from the compressor. So it's actually a 4-pin receptacle. There's 4 pins here. So you just turn this slightly till it locks in place. And push it and turn. So you got to push it and turn that, and it's locked in place. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to install the lines. Now, like I said before, these are color coded for your supply and return. So just match up your red with your red, same as on the compressor. So again, get this lined up correctly. Start it with a few threads until it becomes tight. Then again, grab your spanner wrenches, the 1 3/16 and the 1 inch. And you want to put the 1 inch on this side and then tighten this up. Again, it will be a little bit hard turning. Just keep continuing until it bottoms out. There it is, tight, done. The next thing what I want to show is this is our economy skirt. So normally this will come with a vacuum valve and an NW25. for you to attach to your vacuum pump, whether it's a turbo or rotary vane type pump. The next thing we're going to do is hook up a controller. This is our 10-pin connection that will actually plug into a 335 Lakeshore controller. So what I'm going to do is we're going to take off the shroud just by rocking it back and forth, removing that. Unscrew the rad shield, and we normally rad shields will come nickel plated. Right here, this is kind of like a standard system. We have a silicon diode sensor mounted at the cold tip, and we have a 50 ohm heater at 50 watts for heating the cold finger for your sample, and using it in with the controller to set your temperature. Normally it's wired this way because we want to thermally heat sink it to get the best temperature reading at the cold finger at the end of the cryostat. Right now this is a Lakeshore 335 controller. Normally when we send it to you, we will download all the curves that are set up for your system. But what you want to check before you plug it in, what the correct voltage is on the controller. Again, we will set all that at the factory, but just for your own safety and stuff, to make sure that it's correctly reading the voltage that you're going to have in your laboratory. Now, in order to change the voltage, you can remove this. And the way it's set up with the fuses, all you have to do is you pop this fuse out and you just have to rotate it 90 degrees. And if you notice, on the very end of this, it's set up for 100 volts, 120 volt, 220 volt, and 240 volt. So in just rotating it and making sure it's identified with the right voltage here, you can just stick it back in, make sure everything's intact. So we'll set it back to 120, put it back in. It's set for 120 volts. Slide it back in and just push it till it locks. So that will be actually the first thing I would look at to make sure you have the right cable for the right voltage. Now we're going to hook up the controller cable to actually record your temperature and also to run your heat on the cryostat. This is a 10-pin connector. So normally you could actually put it here, rotate it till you feel that it'll go in. Turn this, locked in place. Then the next thing we'll do is we'll hook onto the back of the controller. This plug here is for your heat. These here are for channel A and B. They are identified control sensor and your free lane sensor. So on the control sensor, that's used to run the heat, which will go into input A. Just push it in. Again, this will lock in place. Make sure it's locked in. And take your second cable, which is number 2, your free length sensor. Push it in. Again, lock it in place. Make sure it's tight. For your heater, you have 2 different heater outputs. So depending on how you want to run it, you could stick it in either one. Put your heater plug in there. It doesn't matter what orientation it's in. It'll work either way. The front panel of the controller, It also comes with legs on the bottom, so you could elevate the controller to see easier. The power plug is in the back, so you want to plug that in, engage the switch. As you can see already, normally the standard DT670 SD sensor curves are already preloaded into the controller. If you get a calibrated sensor, we will actually download that into the controller for you, and then on our wiring schematic that is sent with the test report will indicate to you what channel the curve is on. So right now we're reading at room temperature, which is 295/46K. This right now is just running, but there's no second sensor hooked onto this cryostat. This here is your set point, which you could change depending on if you want to adjust your heating on the system. If you go over here to set point, you could actually change it 0, hit enter. Now if you want to change your set point, you could change your set point, put 150K, enter, and then it'll show what your temperature reading is. Depending on how you want to set your PIDs, these are preset from Lakeshore. So normally, if you push P, it's set at 50. Hit enter. Hit I is 20. Enter. And D is 0. Now it comes up set up like that from the factory. But if you read the manual on the controller, it will identify at different set points. You could actually change your PID settings to get a more stability on your curve. The other thing is it has heater range. So if you have 150K and you hit this and it has heater off, but now if you want to run it at a different temperature, you could just hit the arrow indicator for low, medium, or high. And if you want to run it at high, then all you have to do is hit enter and it'll kick the heater on. And then at your set point, it'll overshoot your set point and then it'll run steady at 150 Kelvin. And then if you want to disengage, just hit escape and it'll turn the heater off. Here the heater will actually go on, so if you want to shut the heater off itself, you could hit this button and that'll shut everything off. And that's the normal setup for a 335 controller. And I recommend that you look at the manual, and there's a lot of other settings that you could go into to improvements or to put some of your own settings in there. And this is the final setup for standard installation of the ARS cryostat and cryo cooler with the compressor, controller, and the cryostat.